Hey everybody, Mr. Denton here. Welcome back. Hope you guys are all doing well out there. We've finished up with the federal constitution, so we're going to move on to the state level of government. So we're going to briefly, just in one set of notes, take a look at that today. Before we get started, I want to just point this out. Keep it in mind, we're not going to dig way down on the state of Illinois here. We'll look at states and their role in all of this generically. We'll touch on Illinois just a little bit, especially at the end. But whether you stay here or you take a job and you go to school somewhere else, it's your job, your responsibility to know and learn about that state and what you should expect from them. I want you guys to know that as much or more than anything else. What's the responsibility of the state to you as the citizen? What's your responsibility to that state, no matter what state it is? Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and we're going to get started with some pretty general stuff here. All right, we're going to talk about this a little bit more here in just a second, so I'm not going to dig in on this too much. But each state has three branches, just like the federal government, and each state, like the federal government, has its own constitution and laws. Okay. So we're going to talk about the relationship of those branches and the federal with the federal government and the constitutional laws with the federal constitutional laws. States provide services of various kinds to their citizens, and states protect their citizens by regulating activities and services. Those last 2 points bring me to another point that's I think really important. I may have mentioned this before, but the federal government gets all the publicity. Okay, it's the one you turn on the news. That's where you're going to see most of the talk during election season. Those are the elections you're going to see the most on. And the federal government and the people that work for the federal government are the most powerful people in the country. And, some of them are the most powerful people in the world. So it makes sense that they get a lot of publicity. But a lot of times we forget that the bigger the higher up on the food chain we go, the farther away those people are from us. And so, while it's fun to kind of get caught up in the sport of it when you're talking about stuff that's going on at the federal level, the farther you move down the food chain, even though the state level is less powerful than the federal level, and then you go all the way down to the local level, it's even less powerful. But the farther you go down, the closer those levels of government are to you, and therefore they have a greater impact on your life, and you as a citizen can have a greater impact on that realm of government. Okay, for instance, if you're not happy with something that's going on here in Olney, Illinois or Richland County, you can pick up the phone and likely call that person and talk directly to them and tell them what your issues are and what you would like to see done. You try to call President Trump, you're probably not going to get through. Okay, and it's just that's a really important thing, really important theme of this class that we would have been stressing a lot had I been seeing you every day. So I want to make sure that I pointed that out. Okay, so the bottom line here: states do have a lot of power and a lot of responsibility, and they have a major impact on your life, even though you're not seeing Illinois necessarily on the news every day. If you were to turn on, cable television, okay. State governments are required to be set up and function in an almost identical fashion to the United States government. Remember, in the last set of notes, Article 4, if you want to be a state in the United States of America, you have to guarantee that you're going to provide to your citizens a Republican form of government. That we're not talking about political parties. Republican form of government means that we have a representative form of government, three branches, executive, judicial, and legislative. It's going to be set up in that fashion, and we get to elect our representatives. Okay? Really important thing to understand: the United States Constitution is the law of the land. State constitutions, while the states get to write those, they have to be in the image of the federal Constitution. They can add to the rights, they can expand on rights, they can expand on the concepts that are in the Constitution, but they can't contradict those things and they can't take them away. So that's very important to know and to understand. All right, we're going to talk about that relationship more in this section too. Okay, so important to understand this. All right, the federal Constitution is a contract between the states. A lot of times, I think we have a tendency to make the federal government out to be the boogeyman when it comes to this relationship between the states and the federal government. But the states are the ones that created the federal government, and so there's a trade there, a trade that was chosen and made. All right, and remember that the Articles of Confederation, our first Constitution, they tried a weak federal government with stronger states, and it was a flop. It didn't work. And so they had to try basically the flip side of that, okay? And it has resulted in the most powerful and greatest country in the history of the world, okay? All resulting from that Constitution in 1787, that contract between the states. The states had to decide, do we want to be our own individual countries, or do we want to be something greater? And if you look at the 50 states, only 2 or 3 of them really could probably be anything on their own, and even then they would not be anything comparable to the United States of America. So it's a trade-off, and there's pitfalls, and there's some things that go along with that people don't like, but it was a choice that was made, and for the most it's turned out for the best. Okay, so the states gave up their authority, willingly gave up that authority to this federal government in exchange for stability and protection. Okay, so the thing is they made that decision, but they were conscious about how they did that when they wrote the Constitution. They wanted to keep that federal government. They wanted it to be powerful. It needed to be powerful, but no more powerful than what was necessary. It needed to be limited. Okay, in other words, that government is going to be big, but it should be as small as we can keep it. Okay, its authority should be great, but only as much as it needs. And you see why. A government with too much power that is too far removed from the people could mean the destruction of liberty. All right, so in other words, we as citizens want power to be vested in people who are close to us, okay, so that they have to respond to us. If all the power was just in one federal government and they didn't have to deal with us at all, that's where tyranny lies, okay? So you see there in the 10th Amendment, any power not listed or denied in the Constitution belongs to the states. All right. So a little bit of review here, different types of powers. You have reserved powers. Those are powers that are kept by the states. Express powers. Those are powers that the states gave to the federal government. They're specifically listed there. Implied powers. Those are where you see things like the necessary and proper clause. Remember that's nicknamed the Elastic Clause. That's where the federal government, in particular Congress, they've used the Constitution to expand their power because not every power could be listed in the Constitution, and that's legit. Some people think they've taken that and taken it too far, but like I said, we've already had that conversation. We're not going to go down that path too far again here. Then you have concurrent powers, powers that are shared between the state and the federal level, things like taxes, spending, etc. Okay. All right. So the state's maybe greatest power is what's called police power, and it's not just what it sounds like. It goes far beyond just being able to put law enforcement out in the streets and enforcing the law. Okay. So you see there some of the responsibilities and the power that the states have. Power to protect, okay, health, safety, and morals of a community. Legislation to pass and enforce laws that promote the general welfare of that state. To limit private rights at times for the good of the public. To address major needs in the community. Again, that's why you want a state level government and then a local government, because it knows what's going on the ground, and it can respond to those things. And then just understand it too that this power differs greatly from state to state, because every state's got its own constitution, and it's in a different region with different people, and they've decided to develop things in a different way within the confines of being in the image of the Constitution. So when you go from state to state, you find all different kinds of things in the Constitution and in their laws about the state's ability to regulate things and stuff like that. So noise ordinances, wiring, those are just a couple examples there. All right. So this is important to understand too. The states gave away their power to the federal government on purpose, by choice, in exchange for protection, stability, etc. Okay. But in theory, they also have the ability to take that power back if the federal government ever gets out of control. Okay. Now we say in theory because it's not very likely. Okay. Making changes to the Constitution is extremely difficult. Okay, you got to have 2/3 of both houses of Congress, and you got to have 3/4 of all the states agree to do something. All right, 50 states, so 3/4 of that, and a huge majority in Congress making amendments and making changes to the Constitution, taking power away from the federal government. Extremely difficult. That's why a lot of times people are hesitant to give the federal government more power because they know how hard it will be to take it away. All right. Again, part of democracy is struggle and it's frustration, and that's by design. People get really fed up with our government a lot of times because it seems to move so slow. But again, that was on purpose. Okay, we want that tug of war. And so that's not just going on between the three branches, but it's also going on between the federal government and the states. And that prevents any one faction of our government from becoming too powerful and turning into a fascist state or a tyranny or whatever, okay, a dictatorship. Congress taking advantage of the necessary and proper clause and doing things like using its commerce power, a lot of times that's they're exercising more power over the states, and when that happens, the states don't like it. Okay, with good reason, because when the federal government becomes more powerful, usually the states become a little less powerful. States are also guilty of testing boundaries and trying to expand their own power as well. And another source of conflict a lot of times is that the federal government does provide money to the states. We're going through a situation right now where with the virus and everything else that's going on. I mean, the states are. This is the relationship between the states and the federal government is under a microscope right now, and you're seeing AIDS packages that are being passed. The states are requesting more money, more help, more funding, and as that's going on. A lot of times when money is given to the states, the federal government makes requests or demands. They give, criteria. And so it's called, having strings attached. All right. And states don't like being told what to do with that money. And that creates conflict as well. And then finally, just competing ideologies of the politicians who are in power, both at the federal level and at the state level. Okay. You're seeing a lot of clashes between certain states and the federal government right now when it comes to dealing with stay-at-home orders and assistance, monetary assistance to deal with the virus and everything. And most of that conflict, not all of it, but most of it is coming from states where you've got a Democratic governor and dealing with a Republican president, and you're not seeing very much of it between red states and the president. That's because they're mostly in line with President Trump. They want to be seen as being in line with President Trump, so you're not seeing as much friction now. Maybe some of that's going on behind closed doors and we're not seeing it, but we don't know. Okay? All right. So last couple will go pretty quick here. What is the purpose of the state government? Well, one is to govern. Okay? Oops. Bounce back here real quick. One is to govern. All right? State constitutions are the law of the land. I already said that once when I was talking about the federal constitution. State constitutions are the law of the land within the borders of that state. But remember, okay, those laws and that constitution cannot conflict with federal law or federal constitution. All right? So they have to be within the boundaries of that, and it's only good within the boundaries of that state. Okay? There's power over policy, action, finance within the state. Power is separated into branches. already talked about that. And then power to create smaller units of government, counties, for instance. All right. Um, so you see legislation here. Okay. State laws like speed limits can vary from state to state as long as they don't conflict with federal laws. Okay. So if you go from one state to the next, you see that the speed limits can change. All right. And usually, again, if you go to Montana, you can you can drive 80 almost everywhere. Okay. Because there's not very many people that live there. And so it makes sense to allow people to drive at that speed. But when you're in more heavily populated areas, and that's why it's good for states to be in control of things like that. Okay. States provide protection and services to us. So one of the things, Americans hate taxes, but we have to as a citizen, have to understand the fact that if we are going to expect anything from our government, they're going to have to tax. We have to, somebody has to pay for the things that we benefit from, roads, schools, etc. Okay, police officers, firefighters, all those, and teachers. Those things cost money, and someone's got to pay for it. Okay, if our society is going to move forward, we got to work together to make those things happen. And the way we have things set up, the number one way we do that is to pay taxes together to provide for the greater good. Okay, these things vary from state to state. Okay, so you can see taxes on tobacco, but also things like income tax. I mean, some states, Florida doesn't have an income tax. Okay, so that just depends on where you go. All right. Police power is really, again, it's not just about law enforcement, it's about providing protection. So that's why states can do things like require barbers to get licenses, or why you have places that have, health codes and things like that. That stuff usually comes from the state level. All right. So also, this is a quick one here, testing solutions. Many issues are nationwide issues, but not all of them. And even the ones that are look different in different places. And sometimes what happens, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, because of factors like region, population, nationwide issues usually have their own flavor in different states. And so states can tailor solutions for their people. So again, for instance, with the coronavirus, the federal government is pumping money out to the states, and leaving it up to them as to how they decide. I mean, there's probably, I'm sure, lots of stipulations on how they have to spend that money, but it's up to them to spend it and to decide what is the best way to spend it for their people, for what's going on in their state. Okay, case in point, New York and New Jersey, they're on the forefront of what's going on with the coronavirus. That's where the epicenter is when it comes to cases in the entire world. So they've got to, first of all, they're probably getting more money in some respects. Second of all, they're probably going to spend their money differently than a state that's like Montana, that's heavily rural. Okay, so state governments can also they can take that money and tailor it to the needs of their people. All right. Also, states can be what are called innovation incubators. Okay, because states are unique. States a lot of times will become places to test out different solutions. So before the federal government says, "Hey, this is going to be a nationwide thing," let's try it at the state level in a couple places and see how that goes. Okay. For instance, the Affordable Care Act, which was passed, during the beginning of the Obama administration, which guarantees health care to American citizens. They basically ripped that off from the state of Massachusetts. Okay, it was that almost literally the same plan, same form of action was used in the state of Massachusetts before it became the Affordable Care Act and the law of the land in the United States of America. And things like that happen all the time. Okay. All right. States team up. A lot of times issues are too big for one state, So those states team up with the federal government, with other states, with local governments to try to find solutions. Okay, so we talked about strings being attached. A lot of times the federal government provides money and guidance, while the state provides additional funding and oversees implementing it, putting it into action. Sometimes, though, the federal government will provide guidance with no money. Okay, and so that is referred to as an unfunded mandate. One of the more famous ones that's been around in your lifetime was No Child Left Behind from the Bush administration, that had a lot of stipulations about schools and testing scores and things like that. And they came through and said, hey, everybody has to meet these criteria, everybody has to meet these goals. But there was literally no money that went along with it. And really, there was actually a lot of times punishments for not meeting those goals, even though there was no support to help schools actually get there and help states get there and everything else. And so those are usually seen pretty negatively. Okay. Okay. Lastly here, the breakdown of state governments. We already talked about the fact that it's got to be a Republican-style setup, 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. So you're going to notice a common theme here. These governments are a miniature version of the federal level. Okay. So the legislative branch is going to look a lot from state to state. They might have different names. They might call themselves House of Delegates or General Assembly or whatever else the case may be, but they are going to look a lot like what you see at the federal level. All right. So for the federal, the states are the building blocks. In other words, we send representatives from the states to to Congress. But at the state level, the building blocks are different districts. Okay, within the state. All right. So important to understand again that we have something called the Supremacy Clause. Federal law, states pass their own laws, but they have to be within the framework of the federal Constitution, and they have to be in line with federal law. Okay, and if they're not, then they're going to get struck down somewhere along the way. Okay. 49 of 50 states have a bicameral legislature. You can see it over there on the left. Nebraska is the only state whose legislature has a unicameral or one-chamber legislature, and they call theirs the Senate. All right. So you see our current representatives. We are in the 109th district when it comes to our House. If you look on the map there, I'm going to see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. We're in the 109th, if you can find that down there in southeastern Illinois. But then you can see there in it's part of a larger blue area. We are in the 55th Senate District. Okay, so that shows you where we're at, and these are the 2 gentlemen that are currently representing us. We'll start with Dale Ryder over on the right, Republican. And again, we are in a very blue state. Okay, in almost every presidential election, we're going to wind up going as a state with the Democratic side, and we're typically almost always going to have a Democratic governor, and we're usually going to have 2 Democratic senators. But then after that, and that's all, mostly because of up north and especially in Chicago. But Southern Illinois is extremely red. Okay. So we live in one of the reddest areas inside of the country, probably inside one of the bluest states in the country, which is interesting. Okay. So over on the left, Dale Ryder, he's our state senator who's elected in 2016. Those guys serve 4-year terms, and he is finishing up. Okay. And he's going to be retiring. This is not his first term. I think he's been in there for over a decade at least. And so he's going to be retiring, and there's a strong possibility that he will be replaced by the guy over on the right, Darren Bailey, who is he's in his first term as our state rep. And he's made a name for himself recently. I mean, he's been somewhat of a well-known figure. He stands out. He's kind of a controversial guy in some ways, and he is holding to that right now. He's in the news quite a bit because he sued Governor Pritzker over the stay-at-home order, and so he's been in the news quite a bit, on that lately. Okay, so he is going to be running for Dale Ryder's seat in the state Senate because, like I said, Dale Ryder is stepping down. Um, he's got a lot of name recognition. I'd say there's a strong possibility that he's got a good shot at winning that, but we shall see. Okay, you can see there state reps serve 2-year terms just like at the federal level. Okay, that brings us to governor. Okay, states are like miniature forms of the United States. The governor is kind of like the miniature president. All right, they have many of the same powers and responsibilities as the president, but just within their state. Okay, their power does not expand past their borders. All right, they might make deals with other states and things like that, but as far as their executive powers, it's within their state, and that's it. They are responsible for executing the laws passed by the state legislature. Again, it mirrors the federal government. See over on the right, J.B. Pritzker. It's his first term as governor. He was elected in 2018. He is he's a Democrat. We did have and I said usually we're going to have a Democratic governor. We did have 4 years under a Republican governor prior to Pritzker being elected in 2018. Pritzker, he's a guy that it's shown up here during the stuff going on with the virus, but he has said from day one of taking office that he planned to be one of the most progressive governors in the country, and progressive, proactive, however you want to put that. And he wants Illinois to be one of the most progressive and proactive states in the country. And Illinois has got a lot of issues, and he believes that we're going to have to be proactive if we're going to want to get out of the hole and deal with some of those things. And again, that has shown up here over the past couple months. Illinois was one of the first states to shut its schools down. It was one of the first states to issue a stay-at-home order. And so, it's that stuff didn't come as a surprise. Pritzker said all along that he was going to be an active person in that office. And so he'll be up for re-election again in 2022. We'll see what happens there. Okay. A lot of it will probably have to do with how he continues to handle the situation that we're in right now. And then finally, we have the courts. You can see there, kind of over on the left, sort of the general setup. Usually you have municipal, city, or justice courts. Then you've got superior courts and appeals courts, then to the Supreme Court. We in Illinois actually have something called the Circuit Court. And then we have an appellate court, and then we have a Supreme Court. Those are all within Illinois. Okay. And then if something goes beyond the state Supreme Court, then it would then go to the federal Supreme Court if it got appealed and was accepted beyond that. All right. Our circuit here, usually we have several judges in a district that can rotate around or be appointed depending on circumstances, whether or not they know someone or whatever else. Okay. And talk about Judge Dunn, who usually comes and speaks to us and does an awesome job when we're in the classroom. He's talked about the fact that he's served basically in almost every part of our district. I mean, he's been all over the place. And so again, these judges travel around to make sure that they can be as unbiased as possible. And so that's why that's set up there. Okay. So there are judges that are appointed at the top levels, but a lot of them are elected. And usually they're elected to 6-year terms. Our resident judge, our circuit judge, is currently Judge Larry Dunn, but he has announced that he will be retiring from that aspect of his life at the end of this year. Okay, so we will have an election this November of 2020 to find out who will be replacing Judge Dunn. he's a really good one. So I'm sure whoever we have in that position going forward is going to do a great job as well. So that's it for this one. Okay, we've got one left dealing with citizenship. Hope you guys are well. Let me know as always if you got any questions. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you soon.